Thanks for joining us again on the wonderful world of Genealogy, a Newcastle Family History Society podcast. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. In this, the final episode in the series, Maree and Ken Shilling have shared 10 valuable tips aimed at helping you overcome the frustrating obstacles that often hinder our research progress. As in episode 5, Ken is joined by Margaret Ashford.
Brick walls are something we all bump into along the research path, tending to test our sense of humour and ability to think laterally. Perhaps it would be a good idea to step back and review your work so far, generation by generation. Have you verified the information you have through birth, marriage and death certificates or other primary sources such as parish registers? Are you keeping a chart, either on a computer program or handwritten on paper, showing family names, places and dates? This makes it easy to see just where gaps are. In this podcast, we are offering some tips which hopefully might just give a spark of inspiration to your research. Tip 1. Go local. If your ancestor lived in or near a large town, think about organising a visit. You might find there is a local library, museum or historical society which could provide you with a map of the town in earlier times. If you know of any particular religious affiliation of your family, seek out the church and make contact with the minister before your visit to arrange an appointment. They may allow you access to the church records. Perhaps, of course, a donation could be appropriate. But if your family lived in a small village or country area, look for the places where locals congregate and get into conversation with them. They just might be able to pinpoint the place where your family lived. Being able to walk on the route great-grandfather took each day to his workplace, or great-grandmother's regular visit to a local farm to buy some eggs, is an experience to treasure. Spend time in the area your ancestor called home. Tip 2. Directories. Post office directories, road directories and trade directories can all help in your family history investigation. The disappearance of a name from a directory might indicate an interstate or overseas move, or perhaps a death, especially if a wife's name replaces her husband's in an entry. However, you should bear in mind that street names and house numbers may have changed over the years, some more than once.
Tip 3. Birth dilemmas. If you can't find an ancestor around the time they were supposedly born, extend the time parameters. Registration may have been delayed for any number of reasons. Sometimes parents didn't get around to registering the birth of their child within the statutory 6-week period. Rather than paying a fine, they may have adjusted the date of birth to fit the new time period. Addresses shown on birth certificates don't always indicate whether the place of birth was at the parent's residence, a nursing home, hospital or other institution. Check the street on a directory or road map to find the most likely place. No father's name on a child's birth certificate? Look carefully at the name given to the child. It is possible a clue lies in the child's middle name. If the father's name is not in the birth register, it may be recorded in a church baptism register. Ever wondered why some children in a family were baptised in a different religion to that of their siblings? If your family lived on the land in a fairly remote area, chances are they would not be churchgoers due to long distances. Instead, a preacher or minister would travel on a circuit to visit the remote outposts of his domain, performing baptisms, marriages and memorial services for his flock. A family may not see a minister of their choice for over a year, and being desirous of having their child baptised, would ask the next minister who visited on his rounds to perform the ceremony. So you could have half the children in the one family baptised as Roman Catholic and the other half as Church of England. It all depended on who was visiting on their circuit at the time. I wonder if this situation was just accepted or if it caused some discord later in life.
Tip 4. Terms and titles. The meaning of some of the terms and titles we use today have changed over the years, almost without us realizing, and you may come across them in early documents encountered in your research. Taking two as examples, the term in-law in years past sometimes meant the same as today's step, and the use of cousin could mean any person of kin rather than a precise relation, much like the Australian Indigenous people's use of auntie and uncle. Our second example is the use of the titles Miss or Mrs. They have not always been used as we use them today. The title was sometimes given to a senior servant, such as a housekeeper, whether they were married or not, and some single women in business used the title supposedly to add prestige to their endeavours. This could lead you on a merry chase for a non-existent marriage. You might also come across the terms granny or mistress, which were bestowed upon elderly women in some older records. These terms do not mean that they were definitely married or that they had children. Tip 5. The common name problem. If your ancestor has a common name, such as John Brown, and you have no record of his parents, you will be faced with multiple entries on any births, deaths, and marriages index. It usually ends up being placed in the too hard basket, but there is an elimination process which might help you tackle this all too familiar problem. Firstly, cross off any who died at a young age, and therefore did not have any children. Next, if you are sure your John Brown died in Australia, eliminate all other countries. Follow this up with a more localised elimination of states, other than the one you think might be applicable. Now you have a more manageable list. Your next step would be to check any local newspapers for obituary notices or funeral notices. If a notice appears that does not contain any names you recognise, then eliminate that one. Don't be tempted to eliminate a notice because the place is wrong. A person might die in one place, having lived in another, and be buried in a third place, just so relatives could care for their graves. An example of this is found in Robert Westaway's story. He lived for most of his life in Maitland, but moved to his son's residence in Greta just before he died. However, as Robert's son was not a well man, he deferred to the rest of his younger siblings, who organised a burial for Robert in Rookwood Cemetery, Sydney. Another trap for young players would be if they were tempted to eliminate a funeral notice because my John Brown never married the woman mentioned in the notice. Can you be sure about that? We would not be surprised if the death of a young mother left a grieving father and children, nor would we be surprised if shortly after records held a second marriage for the father, who needed a mother figure for his children. However, suddenly coming across a notice at a very much later date indicating there was a connection between your John Brown and this other woman would definitely be a surprise and would warrant further investigation before being eliminated. Hopefully the name of Brown will not be such a problem in the future. Tip 6. A fallacy. Only the rich left wills. This is not right. While many of the so-called rich class did leave wills, records show everyone from working-class people to agricultural labourers did so as well. It is worth checking out the probate packets for your family's name. These are held at Western Sydney Record Centre, Kingswood, and contain the will and any documentation related to the granting of probate. Simply search the main index on the State Archives and Records Authority website using the deceased's name. If you find a likely record, note the packet number. You can then arrange to view the document at the reading room in Kingswood or order a hard copy to be sent to you for a fee. Please note the State Records and Archives Authority index for probate packets only covers from 1817 to 1890 and part of 1890 to 1985.
Tip 7. Starting your family story. What a great idea. One thing to keep in mind is that there is no right or wrong way of doing this. Each family story will be unique. It may be centred on an individual or on a whole family, or indeed just on one part of a person's life, such as their military career. The choice is yours. But before you put pen to paper or finger to keyboard, have an idea who you are writing for. Is it just for yourself or maybe your grandchildren? You might even be thinking of a professional publication. In making this decision, possibly without even realising it, you have also decided on your approach. Will it be chatty or a well-researched formal work suited for researchers' use? If you are having trouble in getting that first sentence down, one idea would be to describe a photo of your ancestor or an object that belonged to them, especially if you have decided this story would just be for your immediate family. A story does not have to begin with the birth of your ancestor. You could start halfway through and then go back. Published authors do this on many an occasion, so why can't we? Tip 8. Suggested alternatives. If you did decide to write the family story, it is good to include bits that still puzzle you. If you come across conflicting evidence and can't resolve the problem through your research, simply present both sides of the dilemma and let the reader decide for themselves. There is no shame in admitting you don't know. But perhaps writing the family story is not for you. You might prefer to prepare a chart for a family reunion or even a short slide presentation with captions. Maybe starting a blog or setting up a website appeals to you. And of course, you could become involved in podcasting. There are so many avenues available today for telling your story to the wider world.
Tip 9. Back up, back up, back up. I can't stress this enough. How often are we told to do this, and yet sometimes that good advice goes unheeded, and we are left with a possible major loss of information on our hands. Please back up every time you do significant work, or at least on a regular weekly basis. Remember that hard drives and flash drives have a limited life. One day they will fail when you least expect it. Tip 10. I think I've made a mistake. If you discover that you may have made an error in your research, sending your hunt in quite the wrong direction, the first thing to do is to accept that the problem has to be dealt with before any further research can take place. Don't initially throw the problematic area of your research into the bin. Part of it might still be correct. Instead, try to understand why the story doesn't work. Look closely at your research, beginning at the start of the problem section and working through to find where an error could have occurred. Read carefully until you get the feeling something's wrong here. Perhaps you had started this work some years ago, but now with so much more material available online, your research could stand a review. Who knows? This simple step could solve a problem. But if a solution has not been obvious in a review of your research, remember, a problem shared is a problem halved, so be proactive and seek help. Try online forums or family history societies. Look for others who are researching the same family through social networking sites. Explain your problem and offer to share any information with them that they might not have. Sometimes it pays to take a break from that family for a short time and concentrate elsewhere on your family tree. The more experience you gain, the more you'll bring back to your problem at a later date. We will leave this set of podcasts with 2 thoughts for you. 1, never let a setback become a full stop. And 2, remember, your family history is never really finished. Thank you.
Maree Shilling has been a most enthusiastic contributor to this podcast initiative, and her wealth of knowledge and expertise will be sorely missed. We sincerely thank Maree and Ken for such an interesting array of podcasts in this series. I'm sure that both novice and seasoned family historians will have found them most valuable. For more local and family history related topics, you can visit our website www.nfhs.org.au, search us up on Facebook, or follow us on Newcastle Family History Society Podcasts.